Find Wendy and Marvin.
The only reason the government agreed to turn over the money.
Super Friends. 1973 was not just a bright Saturday morning cartoon. It was a full-scale cultural prototype that redefined what superhero teams could be on television. Behind the cheerful colors and simple morality tales lurked production chaos, from vanished scripts to panicked network notes to voice actors juggling 3 roles at once. You are about to discover 15 wild facts about Super Friends, 1973, that rewrote animation history when nobody was looking. Fact number 15. The show was nearly canceled before airing. What audiences never saw is how close Super Friends comes to disappearing before it ever reaches a Saturday slot. ABC executives panic when early test reels show pacing that feels slower than rival superhero cartoons. The problem is built into the scripts. Hanna-Barbera is required by the network to create stories that emphasize moral lessons over action scenes. That means long stretches of dialogue and explanations. Executives fear children will tune out instantly. Internal memos reveal a heated debate that erupts inside ABC's programming offices. One faction wants to replace the entire show with a talking animal comedy. Another insists the Justice League name alone guarantees ratings. Production stalls for 2 weeks as Hanna-Barbera fights to keep the original concept alive. The series survives by a razor-thin margin, creating a quiet miracle before episode 1 even airs. Fact number 14. Wendy and Marvin exist because of a legal problem. Wendy and Marvin do not exist for creativity. They exist for legal safety. Hanna-Barbera is not allowed to use certain DC sidekicks without complex rights negotiations. Rather than delay production, DC suggests creating original teen partners to accompany the heroes. But the network then pushes for them to be relatable teens, not costumed sidekicks. Internally, the design teams get frustrated because these characters require more screen time than expected and slow down superhero action even further. Animation dailies show repeated rewrites to tone down their clumsy behavior because test groups claim Marvin's mistakes make Superman look incompetent. It isn't an artistic choice. It is risk management. Super Friends therefore becomes the only Justice League adaptation that must balance legal caution with storytelling, and it leaves an unforgettable imprint on the earliest episodes. Fact number 13. Superman's voice actor records in a heatwave studio. Danny Dark, the voice of Superman, works under brutal conditions. The recording booth at Hanna-Barbera's studio suffers repeated cooling failures during a sweltering Los Angeles heatwave. Cast members describe sweat pooling under headphones and scripts sticking to arms. Dark records heroic lines while barely able to breathe comfortably. Engineers rush sessions because equipment begins overheating. In one internal report, an audio spike ruins an entire reel after a fan collapses mid-take. The team continues because schedules are tight and ABC demands delivery. Not action, but endurance defines these early Superman sessions. What fans later hear as calm authority is actually the voice of an actor pushing through physical strain, turning discomfort into iconic strength. Fact number 12. Environmental themes trigger unexpected network pushback. Super Friends is widely remembered for teaching environmental lessons. What many do not know is that ABC initially resists these themes. Executives worry that heavy environmental messaging feels too political for young viewers. The writers, however, see the environmental crisis growing nationwide and insist the heroes must address pollution, forest destruction, and water contamination. The tension escalates when a script featuring industrial waste is flagged for being anti-corporate. Meetings stretch for hours. Pages get rewritten 3 and 4 times. When the episodes finally air, they resonate deeply with children, sparking teacher discussions and even classroom projects across the country. Not controversy, but impact becomes the show's legacy, even though the network originally tries to water it down. Fact number 11. Hawkman and other heroes are cut for budget reasons. Fans wonder why certain Justice League members do not appear in the first season. The answer is not mystery, it is math. Each new hero requires new animation cycles, unique action poses, multiple mouth charts, and transformation frames. Hanna-Barbera cannot afford to build these assets in time for the 1973 premiere. Hawkman and others become victims of spreadsheet logic. Animators later admit they storyboard early scenes with additional heroes who are quietly erased after budget reviews. What audiences see is a streamlined version of the Justice League, not because of storytelling choice, but because production dollars simply cannot stretch any further. The show becomes a study in creative survival under financial pressure. Fact number 10. The animation pipeline nearly collapses mid-season. Midway through production, the animation pipeline buckles under impossible deadlines. Hanna-Barbera is juggling multiple series at once, and Super Friends unexpectedly becomes the most resource-heavy show of the season. Background painters fall behind. Ink and paint departments report shortages. Overseas animation partners return inconsistent frames that must be corrected overnight. One memo warns that the entire season might miss delivery. Directors scramble building emergency teams to redraw scenes as fast as they arrive. Animators describe nights when more than 200 drawings pile on a single desk waiting for approval. The pressure becomes intense enough that the studio temporarily reassigns artists from unrelated comedic shows just to keep Super Friends afloat. And if you are enjoying these revelations, go ahead. And like and subscribe because the chaos only gets wilder from here. What looks smooth on screen is actually the result of a production held together by grit, panic, and sheer artistic stubbornness. Fact number 9. Kasem argues over Robin's dialogue. Kasem, famous for his radio career, is deeply protective of Robin. He believes sidekicks deserve meaningful intelligence, not scattershot quips. But early drafts give Robin overly childish lines and exaggerated exclamations. Kasem pushes back, hard. He insists the boy wonder must sound capable. Writers disagree, worried that making Robin too mature will blur distinctions between him and Batman. Tension rises. Recording sessions slow down as Kasem rewrites lines on the spot. Robin would not say that becomes his most repeated phrase inside the booth. Producers eventually concede, allowing Kasem limited script rewrites. The shift is subtle but crucial. Robin evolves from comic relief into a genuine partner who solves problems with logic and quick analysis. Not an accident, but an argument shapes his iconic voice, delivering more depth than the network originally intended. Fact number 8. The Wonder Twins replace a scrapped superhero pair. Before Zan and Jaina leap into Super Friends history, an entirely different duo occupies their conceptual space. Early pitch documents reveal a pair called the Atom Twins, designed to shrink, fight, and multiply. But their powers prove difficult to animate. Scaling characters frame by frame threatens to double production costs. The idea collapses in a single budget meeting. Hanna-Barbera must invent new teen heroes fast. The solution emerges from practicality. Shape-shifting, water-changing, and animal morphing are easier to draw and require fewer complex transitions. Zan and Jaina are born not through wild imagination, but through strategic compromise. Yet the animators embrace them instantly. Their hand signals, transformations, and elastic powers bring playful movement into scenes that previously felt static. What fans cherish today arises from a scrapped concept rescued by creative adaptability. Fact number 7. ABC demands less violence, forcing radical script changes. Superhero stories usually thrive on physical conflict, but ABC enforces a strict no-violence rule. That means punches, kicks, and direct combat become forbidden territory. Writers struggle because villains must threaten the world without ever landing a blow. Story outlines collapse. Tension evaporates. Meetings stretch late into the night as teams search for solutions. Eventually, they discover a workaround. Replace combat with teamwork, problem-solving, and elaborate rescue sequences. Conflict still exists, but it shifts away from physical harm. However, animators quietly push edges where possible. Explosions, environmental hazards, and collapsing structures become the new form of action. It is not violence, but dramatic peril. The result becomes a stylistic hallmark. Super Friends feels gentle yet adventurous, shaping an entire generation's idea of superhero morality. Fact number 6. The Hall of Justice model sheet sparks internal rivalry. The Hall of Justice appears simple on screen, but its design triggers one of the most competitive disputes inside Hanna-Barbera. Background artists want grand architecture inspired by neoclassical monuments. Layout artists prefer a futuristic crystalline style. Both teams produce separate model sheets, each convinced their approach defines Justice League identity. Tension escalates when the producers choose a hybrid version using ideas from both camps. Some artists feel sidelined, others feel their work has been diluted. Despite the friction, the final Hall of Justice becomes iconic. Its commanding silhouette reflects timeless heroism while still appearing accessible to children. Not harmony, but rivalry shapes the building that becomes synonymous with Super Friends for decades. Fact number 5. Aquaman's powers force emergency rewrites. Aquaman becomes one of the hardest characters to write. Early drafts treat him as a full equal to Superman and Batman, but the writers quickly realize a brutal truth. Most episodes do not involve oceans, lakes, or underwater threats. Aquaman spends too much time standing on land offering commentary instead of action. The imbalance becomes obvious when test audiences describe him as underused. This problem erupts inside the writer's room. Scripts already approved must be restructured so Aquaman gets meaningful moments. The solution comes from reframing him as a strategist rather than a constant fighter. Instead of punching villains, he starts guiding plans, identifying weaknesses, and coordinating teams. His sonar abilities and environmental knowledge grow into narrative tools that support the plot even outside water. It is not a downgrade. It is survival through adaptation. Aquaman remains relevant because the show refuses to let a hero fade quietly into the background. Fact number 4. Overseas animation errors create unintended comedy. Animators in Asia handle large portions of the drawing workload, but communication gaps and tight schedules lead to a string of wild mistakes. Characters blink out of existence mid-shot. Superman's chest symbol changes size between frames. Batman's cape disappears entirely during a chase. These errors force Hanna-Barbera to create a rapid fix unit dedicated to catching visual inconsistencies in the dailies. Staff members flip through thousands of drawings hunting for disasters before the reels ship to ABC. Some mistakes slip through. Fans with sharp eyes later spot Aquaman speaking while his mouth stays frozen and a villain whose legs move opposite the direction he runs. Not flaws, but artifacts of a system stretched beyond capacity. These quirks become part of the show's nostalgic charm, even though they once triggered late-night panic. Inside the studio halls. Fact number 3. The narrator saves episodes that are falling apart. Ted Knight's narration becomes the structural glue of the entire show. Producers quickly discover that many episodes run short or contain confusing transitions because scenes are cut for time or trimmed for censorship. Rather than redraw expensive animation, Hanna-Barbera uses narration as a rescue tool. Knight records new lines explaining off-screen events, smoothing plot gaps, and injecting urgency into slow moments. What audiences experience as dramatic, guiding voiceovers actually hide numerous production problems. Knight rewrites tone and pacing in real time, making episodes feel complete when the visuals alone cannot support them. Not embellishment, but necessity turns his narration into an iconic pillar of the series. Without him, several episodes would collapse under missing story beats and uneven action. Fact number 2. The series accidentally creates the template for future teams. Super Friends does not set out to revolutionize superhero storytelling. It just tries to meet network requirements while keeping DC's characters intact. But its structure, team headquarters, rotating sub-teams, villains of the week, rescue-based solutions, and moral lessons becomes the blueprint for decades of animated hero shows. Writers from later eras admit studying Super Friends tape by tape to understand team flow and ensemble dynamics. What appears simple is the result of solving limitations. No violence forces creativity. Budget limits force teamwork scenes. Long run times force dialogue-driven strategy. These constraints become a formula future shows willingly adopt. The cartoon limits itself, but the industry expands because of it. Super Friends accidentally shapes the architecture of superhero animation worldwide. Fact number 1. Its ratings surge rebuild Saturday morning television. When Super Friends premieres, expectations are low. ABC is unsure whether kids want moral stories instead of pure action, but ratings erupt during the first weeks. Children tune in not for violence, but for unity, for teamwork, for the emotional comfort of heroes solving problems through logic, cooperation, and bravery. Letters from parents flood ABC, praising the show's educational value. Sponsors take notice. Suddenly, networks who once hesitated scramble to find their own superhero team shows. Super Friends does not just succeed. It resets Saturday morning strategy. The cartoon becomes the anchor of ABC's lineup for years and proves that heroism can thrive inside strict broadcast rules. Its success becomes the foundation on which later superhero universes build their television empires. Bonus fact: the famous "Meanwhile at the Hall of Justice" line was not in the original scripts. One of the most quoted lines in animation history comes from improvisation, not planning. Meanwhile at the Hall of Justice is created when editors need a fast transition to replace an unfinished sequence. Ted Knight records it during a rushed patch session, expecting it to be temporary. Instead, audiences embrace it instantly. The phrase becomes a cultural catchphrase, appearing in parodies, interviews, comic books, and even political commentary. What begins as a production shortcut becomes the immortal voice of the franchise. A moment meant to fill missing footage transforms into the heartbeat of the entire series. It is the perfect reminder that sometimes the greatest legacies emerge from accidents the studio never expected.